And welcome back to DH Deck Building. I'm your host Demo, and this is the top 10 colorless card draw effects in Commander. I'm making this list sort of, as a response to my how to draw cards in white list, because obviously a lot of people commented on oh, these are so bad, why not just use artifacts? And yes, I think in a lot of cases, the cards on this list are going to be probably better than most of the cards on the white list, probably all of them in fact. Cards on the white list are very conditional. I think that's the real issue with drawing cards in white. As I had mentioned, my patron of the Kitsune deck uses a combination. I have no problem drawing cards with that deck, and I use a combination of white cards and artifact cards. So you probably want a mix of both if you're making a mono white deck, but this list is going to be colorless, so it is this is for anything. This isn't, you're making a white deck. This is, you're making a mono red deck, maybe even a mono black deck or a Boros deck. Any deck can fit these cards, right? I made this list specifically so that any card on this list can be put in any deck. It can be put in a colorless deck. It can be put in any deck. Also, a few addendums before I begin with the list. Okay, I didn't include any Howling Mine effects, okay? Howling Mine's not on this list. I know some people like it. I didn't put anything that is going to let everyone draw. This list is all about card advantage, and letting all your opponents draw as well isn't really card advantage. If everyone's drawing, then it's not an advantage for you, right? Horn of Greed is another one. It's not going to be on this list. I know a lot of people probably in the comments are going to say they love Horn of Greed because they're playing a landfall deck and it works extra good in their landfall deck. Sure, but what if you're playing against another guy who's playing a landfall deck and maybe he's taking even more advantage than you, right? I'm not going to talk about why you shouldn't play certain cards or should. I'm only including one-sided stuff in this, right? This is only stuff that's going to draw cards for you and no one else. I'm also not including anything that is really specific, like Well of Lost Dreams or Guess Grimoire. Both of those cards can be really, really good in certain decks, right? Well of Lost Dreams is fantastic in a Life to Gain deck. And Guess Grimoire is, I have that in my Zerzoth deck. It's like the best card in that deck. It's really, really good in any deck where you're making your opponents discard. And I will give an honorable mention to Alhamerit's Archive. It's not technically for, it doesn't actually draw you cards, really. If you're just drawing your first card on every turn on your draw step, it doesn't do anything. But it can be really, really good if you have other card draw effects, or if you're playing a commander like a Tymna that actually does draw cards. So moving on to the list, coming in at number 10, Farsight Mask. And this is one that a lot of people probably haven't seen before. It can be really, really good. Okay, so 5 mana artifact. Whenever a source an opponent controls deals damage to you, if Farsight Mask is untapped, you may draw a card. So they have that untapped clause in there, but really that should probably never apply unless your opponent actually taps it down. I suppose that's possible, but unlikely. So this is every time, if a creature attacks you and hits you, you get to draw a card. This can be really, really good, right? It's a little conditional. I put it on the list. I don't love effects that you have to rely on your opponents to draw cards. This one sort of does. Again, though, it's just like with creatures dying or creatures entering the battlefield, your opponents are going to attack you, guaranteed. Like the chances that you put this down and none of your opponents hit you with anything, that's got to be a 1 in a million, right? It's any source, right? So if they shoot you with a spell, if they have a Purphoros in play, man, against a Purphoros deck, every single time that Purphoros is smacking you, you're drawing a card. This is going to be so good in that situation. It's just an option that a lot of people haven't seen that might work really good, especially in certain situations. Coming in at number 9, Book of Wrath, and this is an old one, and it costs 6, pay 2 mana, pay 2 life, draw a card. So, it's just a repeatable draw. That's it. You're just paying the 2. Like, it basically is Erebos, right? Except colorless. It costs 6, but there's no conditions at all, other than the fact that you have to have the life available. But it's just draw cards whenever you feel like it, which is, pretty darn good. Coming in at number 8, Seer's Sundial. And this one, I know people think that maybe this is a conditional, but it's really not. Landfall, right? Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you pay 2 and draw a card. So you'd think, okay, I'll play this in a landfall deck. I don't think so. I think you could play this in any deck. Every deck has lands, right? Again, it's just like with the creatures dying and everything. If it's going to be happening guaranteed. You have 30 some lands in your deck. You're going to be playing, I don't know what, 7, 8, 10 lands in a game. And if you're drawing cards, you're going to be, the more you draw cards, the more chances you have to play lands, right? So it sort of plays into itself. And it's only 4 mana, which makes it quite a bit, makes it a little bit cheaper than a lot of the other things on this list. Coming in at number 7, Slate of Ancestry. This also is only 4 mana. Then you pay 4 mana, tap it, discard your hand, draw a card for each creature you control. So again, this is a little conditional, but again, every deck has creatures. Guaranteed you got at least one in the command zone, right? Obviously, there's going to be decks that this is way, way better in. There are some people that I've talked to that absolutely love this card, right? They have it in their Risk the Redeem deck or something, right? Where they just have tons of creatures and they'll discard 2 cards, right? They'll have 2 cards in hand, they'll discard 2 and draw 8 or something. It can be really, really good. It can be a powerhouse. There's not any other cards on this list that you can draw like 10 cards with all at once. So, I mean, there's not too many cards in the game that can do that. So it can be really, really good. You could put this in any deck and it'll be okay. I mean, if you have 0 cards in hand, paying 4 to draw 2 cards is actually not bad, okay? But also, you could pay 4 and draw 10 cards. So it's pretty darn good. Up next, Staff of Nin. This was another one that was played a lot in the format back in the day. A lot, it was just one of those options. If you were playing in a deck that was very limited on its card draw, a colorless deck or a Boros deck or mono white or something, this is the go-to option for people. Doesn't see a lot of play anymore, right? So 6 mana artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card. That's it. You just draw a card, an extra card every turn. Also is a pinger, which can be really handy in a commander game too, right? Just sits there and whenever you see a target open, you just let her rip, right? Really has disappeared. Man, I haven't seen this card in a commander game in years, but it is a just straight up draw option. Just sits there, draws you cards. 6 seems like a lot. However, if you look at this list, there's a lot of these cards that 6 is sort of the average. That's sort of the range. If you want a colorless cards that's just going to sit on the table and draw you cards and have 0 drawback, that's about what you're going to pay, right? And I think that's okay, right? Because if you think about it, you're not going to want to draw cards early in the game. I mean, maybe you do, but chances are early in the game, you're playing a casual game, you're probably going to have a full hand anyway, so you don't need the cards until later in the game anyway. So I think it works out. Speaking of 6 mana artifacts, Immortal Sun. This is one of my personal favorites. By the way, this list is, my opinion. Okay, I know sometimes where people are like, oh, why did you rate that so high? This list is more about here are your options. When I make these lists, any of my lists, it's here are 10 options for drawing cards, colorless options that you could put in any deck. The fact that I rank them the way they do is just my personal opinion. If you don't rank them that way, that's fine. It's more about here are your options. Here's what you can use if you need to draw. The Immortal Sun is, for me, as a personal favorite. This is another card that I thought, man, everyone's going to be playing this in Commander when it came out. It's one of those cards that I think they made specifically for Commander. I don't think this has ever been played in Modern or Standard. The first ability, though, is the one I think that gets people. Players can't activate Planeswalker loyalty abilities. I think a lot of people don't put it in their deck for that reason, because they have one Planeswalker, and right, if you have one Planeswalker in your deck, you're probably not going to play Immortal Sun, right? I don't play Planeswalkers, so this is perfect for me. I put this in as many decks as I can, and I like the fact that I can shut off other people's Planeswalkers. In fact, in the early days of me playing Commander, Atraxa Super Friends was all over the place. It was like the most popular deck in the entire format, and man, was it annoying. I swear, every other game I played, I played online, and like every other game I played, I was against an Atraxa Super Friends deck. Maybe they even printed this card for that. I don't know, because Wizards of the Coast will do that, right? They'll print a card in response to something that's really popular. And yeah, this just went in so many of my decks right away. And then also at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card. So again, it's just an extra card draw every turn, which is, fantastic. And then heck, why not also spells you cast cost 1 less? And why not also creatures you control get +1/+1, right? I mean, I remember when this card was spoiled, everyone was going nuts, like, oh, this is going to go in every deck. It's way too good. There's too much going on. I don't see it much. I really don't. I put it in as many decks as I can. I've seen maybe 2 people play on the other side of the table playing this card, which is surprising. And again, I think it's because it shuts off your Planeswalkers too. Maybe that's why it doesn't see more play. Coming in at number 4, War Room. And again, this is why I made the list colorless. It was originally going to be artifacts, that draw you cards, but I thought I'll just throw the lands in there too. Because again, they are options. If you're playing any deck, any deck, these cards on this list will fit in there. And I really gushed over this card when it first came out in Commander Legends. I really like the fact that they have these cards that are sort of leaning towards, they're rewarding players for playing less colors, which I really like. So it taps for mana, which is great. And then pay 3 and pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity and draw a card. So if you're playing a colorless deck, if you're playing an Ulamog deck, you don't pay any life. You just pay 3 mana and draw a card, right? If you're playing a mono white deck, you're just paying 1 life, which is, basically nothing, right? That's you pay for a fetch land, right? It really is nothing. I put this on the list over some other options. This is the only land I put on the list. I just wanted to give lands that draw cards representation. There's also Seagate Wreckage. Bonder's Enclave was another one that I had given consideration that I almost put on the list, but it is a little conditional. War Room is the best of the bunch, I think. Of all the lands that draw cards, I think it's the best, and that's why I put it on the list. But it's sort of representing, there's lots of lands that sort of do that. Throne of the High City is one that will give you the Monarchy, which basically sort of draws you cards. So this one is sort of representing the lands that are colorless, that draw you cards, and I think it's the best. I really like this ability that you are benefiting from playing less colors. I think they need more of that in the format. Coming in at number 3, Endless Atlas. And again, benefiting from playing less colors. This is another card that I'm surprised I don't see more in games. It is, to me, an auto-include in a monocolored deck. Even if you're playing a deck that is, mono black or mono blue and can already draw cards, 2 mana to draw a card is really, really good. Right? Activate this ability only if you control 3 or more lands with the same name. Okay, that's when that happens always, right? Usually in my decks, it's turn 3 sometimes, turn 4 almost always. Almost always by turn 4, I have, so I can play this and then tap it right away and draw a card if I want, right? It's really high on the list. For me, I think this is an auto-include in monocolor decks, even in 2-color decks. Like a Boros deck, you might want to consider this. Coming in at number 2, Mind's Eye. And yes, this card still rates really high for me, even though a lot of people don't play it anymore. Again, this is another card that, this Mind's Eye and Staff of Nin, those were the sort of the go-tos for people who wanted to draw cards. If you were playing a colorless deck or a mono white deck or a mono red deck, those were sort of the options that people used a lot. It's still really good. I don't know why it has sort of faded in popularity. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1 if you do draw a card. So sure, it's conditional, but not really, because your opponents are guaranteed to draw at least 1 card every turn, right? So at very least, at minimum, you're going to draw a card on each of your 3 opponents' turns. So that's 3 cards per turn cycle, assuming you leave up the mana. If you compare this to something like Rhystic Study, which of course is an auto-include for most people in blue decks, Rhystic Study, again, is reliant on your opponents. There is lots of situations, and I've had lots of people tell me that in our play group, we pay. Everyone pays, so you just don't draw cards off a Rhystic Study. You play it, and you don't draw cards. What good is a card if you're just not going to draw cards off of it, right? If you really, really need cards, I'm going to rely on something like Mind's Eye that is going to guarantee me a card draw rather than something like Rhystic Study or Mangara the Diplomat that my opponents, it's in their hands, right? They are in control, right? Maybe my opponent is just going to forego casting 2 spells a turn because they don't want me to draw a card, right? I'm always going to lean towards cards like Mind's Eye where I am in control. And man, Mind's Eye really can go to town. If you're empty-handed, okay, you just sit there and leave all your mana untapped for a turn or 2, and you can fill your hand super quick. 3 cards minimum, but usually people are drawing more cards than that, right? So it can be think of Smothering Tithe, people. Everyone knows how good Smothering Tithe is. This is the same thing. The only difference is you have to pay 1, right? And coming in at number 1, probably to not a lot of people's surprise, is Skull Clamp. This card is just silly. It probably should have never been printed. The fact that they made it 1 mana and equip 1 is so silly. For anyone who doesn't know the story, basically this card came out in Mirrodin, and there was the Affinity deck, right, which had Skull Clamp and Arcbound Ravager and all the artifact lands, and it was busted and it was ridiculous. And it literally almost ruined the game. Like, not even kidding. The amount of Magic players worldwide took a huge dip because that deck was so powerful it completely took over the game. And a lot of people just said, screw it, I quit. Very similar to the Tellurian Academy deck. The difference is the Tellurian Academy deck, they banned like almost immediately. They banned it really fast. The Affinity deck, they didn't. They should have, it was close. Again, it got banned pretty quickly. The deck didn't get banned, obviously. Skull Clamp got banned. Skull Clamp got banned really, really fast. One of the fastest cards to ever get banned, I think. But they should have probably banned it even faster. Or maybe they should have not printed it in the first place. Like, they should have, like, I don't know what they were thinking. 1 mana, like, this is basically 1 mana, draw 2 cards. Like, come on. How did this get past the playtesting phase? This should cost 2 mana, equip 2. Then I think it would be a fair card. In fact, you could even have it cost 2 mana and 2 to equip and draw 1 card, and I think people would still play it lots. The fact that it equip 1 is just so silly. I mean, as everyone knows, this goes in, and again, the Risk to Redeem deck is having this for sure. And now that they changed the dice trigger, right? So now it used to be you would clamp your Risk the Redeemed and it would get you nothing unless you let him go to the graveyard, right? Because he wouldn't die. He would go to the command zone. Now he dies. Now you can clamp it. So this card's gotten even better because you can put it on your commander and you still draw the 2 cards, right? I even have this in my Patron of the Kitsune deck because why not? I don't really have a lot of 1/1 creatures that I can just clamp and draw cards off of. I can just throw this on my commander though, and if my commander dies, I get to draw 2 cards. That's pretty good. It can go in every deck. You can put this in every single deck, throw it on your commander because almost guaranteed people are going to want to kill your commander at some point, and you're going to draw 2 cards off of it. That's it. Or you can put it in a deck that is absolutely busted in, like any deck that makes tokens. A Locust God deck is just insane with this, right? Because you're going to clamp one of your insect tokens. It dies, you draw 2 cards, and you get 2 more insect tokens. So for 1 mana, you're basically just doubling the amount of tokens you're getting and also drawing a bunch of cards. I mean, it's crazy in that deck. It's crazy in a lot of decks. Any deck that is making 1/1 tokens, and there's a lot of those, you're just going to go nuts with this. It's just a ridiculous 1 mana draw engine. 1 mana, draw 2 cards, right? Silly, silly card. And that is my 10 colorless draw effects for Commander. Again, I want to reiterate, these cards, for any new players out there, these cards are available to you. Any deck you're playing, you can put any of these cards in there, all right? So if you're having trouble drawing cards, here's some great options for you. That is it for today. Thanks for tuning in.